नमस्कार, आप देख रहे हैं यूथ एक्सप्रेस और मैं हूं जयश्री सेठी। आज के शो में आप मिलेंगे एक नवोदित राइटर, एक लेखक से।
There ain't no trust the melody in your dying eyes.
उसके अलावा देखेंगे आज की स्पीड जनरेशन की एक अनोखी करामात, एक इनोवेशन विच इज अ मोटर रेसिंग कार। और फिर आपकी मुलाकात होगी यंग एंड वाइब्रेंट फैशन डिजाइनर निदा महमूद से। कहते हैं आप पैशन को फॉलो करोगे तो सक्सेस, फेम और मनी आपको फॉलो करेंगे। हालांकि इसमें थोड़ा वक्त जरूर लग सकता है, लेकिन ये होता जरूर है। अब आप स्वीडन के 80 वर्षीय साइकोलॉजिस्ट और पोएट को ही लीजिए। 1993 से इनका नाम नॉमिनेट किया जाता रहा है नोबेल प्राइज के लिए। He has long been a perennial front runner to win. He is one of the world's most translated poets. लगभग 60 भाषाओं में इनकी रचनाओं का अनुवाद हुआ है। ये हैं टॉमस ट्रांसट्रॉमा, 2011 के नोबेल प्राइज फॉर लिटरेचर के विनर। ऐसे ही लोग, ऐसे ही लेखक तो मिसाल बनते हैं आज की यंग जनरेशन के लिए, नए राइटर्स के लिए। ऐसे ही एक राइटर हैं चेतन त्रिपाठी, आइए इनसे मिलते हैं। Hi Chetan, a very warm welcome.
Thank you.
When young generation of today is focusing on professional viability or courses which allow them to mint money after their college, how come writing happened to you?
Writing was not at all by accident. My father used to write. He in fact published a volume of poetry in early in 1980. So we'd gone to Canada because he was studying over there on a scholarship, and so we had a very old computer over there. It was the latest then, the 386 megahertz computer. So he used to write over there sometimes, you know, and I'd see my sister trying to copy him, and then I was like, why should I be left out? So I was always like, so then I used to be the person who used to always hang around with the computer, always experimenting with it. So then I started writing, and I wrote some of the funniest and most hilarious poems then about cats and dogs and anything that you could find words to jumble up and put together, because that's how you learned what poetry was. You saw your father writing something, your sister writing something, and then you would just try, oh, is this something that's poetry? And my father was very encouraging as an individual, so he'd always be telling my sister good things. So I was like, I also want that to happen with me. So that's how I started.
Your first book was published when you were 14 or 16?
It was published when I was 16. When I was 16, yeah. It was published by a Kannada publisher. Because in fact I sent a manuscript to a professor over there, Professor Dayananda, who was very helpful. He read my poems and he really liked them, so he translated them also and he got them published, and so there were both versions, the English version and the Kannada version that were published. Dreams in My Eyes.
And what was the subject of your poetry in that book?
Well, the first book was very basic questions like about what you saw. It was about traveling, it was about my mother, it was about my sister, it was about the things that I saw and perceived. A very simple, innocent human perception of things. It was not complex at all. In fact, I found my vocabulary at that point of time was very limited, obviously, and I was just trying to just see whatever I saw, and I would just write about them.
So when you were young, what used to be your favorite pastime? Like other kids, would you go out and play football, soccer, cricket, or get addicted to net, or go on your desk and start writing?
No, see, that's the thing. You can't really just sit down and think, I'm going to write now. It never used to happen that way. Poetry used to be instant. It used to be something used to strike you, and as something would just take you hold, and you would just write it down. And I would write on my computer, on the computer. I wasn't someone who wrote in the notebook and then copied. So my teachers in school, they would be like, how do you can't write on the computer. Nobody can write on the computer. So they thought I used to copy my poetry from somewhere. So
on internet and like
cut, copy, paste. And for some time they didn't actually publish my poems at all in the school magazines. They used to be like, he's not writing on his own probably. So there were many questions, why do you write on a computer, so my favorite pastime actually was the computer. So I used to be always on the computer. I used to be doing programming, designing websites, etc. And then whenever I used to feel inspired enough or something used to come along, I used to just write, and that's how my first book came along.
I would like to ask you, how did publishing happens? Because nowadays there are many writers who are talented, prolific, but they don't get the right platform to showcase their talent. They don't get the right publisher, especially to young writers, because the commercial viability is also important. So how was it with you?
No, absolutely. It was very difficult. In fact, my first manuscript was rejected by the publisher of my second book.
Yeah.
He had written me a very lovely letter, Professor Lal, who is no more, but a great man. He wrote me a very long letter as to why my poetry at that point of time was not poetry in his eyes, and that inspired me much further. They have to be very patient, but there are many publishers out there who actually look out for real talent, who are still willing to bet on young people who are writing what they really believe and they're passionate about. And that is the key to everything. If you allow a person with passion to do what they want, they can be very successful. But the moment you start slamming the door on them, saying that, look, we can't sell your poetry unless you're famous and you're above 50, that's just going to destroy people.
Your second book came in 2008, titled The Future I Recall. When I first opened this book, it caught my attention because it is past normally which you can recall. But how come you're recalling the future?
The reason I was thinking about the future I recall is because the time I spent writing my book almost took me 3 years to finish that book, but there was a lot of transition. You go into college and you experience a lot more about human relationships, people, the question of existentialism, and you find out that human beings, as much as they think that they're more unique and everyone is unique, it's by far not that true. It's more like there is a pattern to our lives, there is a pattern to all our lives, and if you actually look close enough, you can actually find out where your life is going to lead. And that is a very difficult job, obviously, and it's not prophetic at all. It's just something that you can envision the future if you want to, if you can find the link between all your actions and emotions.
For a good writer, Chetan, it is equally important to read because it opens new windows, new vistas to your imagination and creativity. Definitely there must be some inspiration or a writer which really excited you. So who was he?
I like listening to people read poetry, and that inspires me a lot. And how they came about, the stories behind their poetry, because I was reading about a poet Hunt, and he was an American. He never wrote a single word till he was 45, and one day he read some poetry, and he went to one of the famous poets in the US, and he said, can I publish this? And all that fellow told him was, write what you really believe in. He said, don't try to write poetry, it just becomes poetry. That's the key. So it just becomes poetry. So who do you read? It depends on what you want to read and what kind of a mood you are and who's reading it to you sometimes.
Chetan, as we were sitting and chatting in the green room, you told me that you can only write when there is some urgency, there is a pressure.
The best times that I feel I used to write the best poetry is when I have exams going on, or because you put all the experiences together and somehow they come out in a manner that becomes poetry, and you just write something that you feel is absolutely raw, and it doesn't have to be refined, because that's the essence of poetry in the end. It has to be raw as it comes.
Though it is very difficult for a writer to choose his best creation, best poetry or a piece, but still I would like to hear you recite your best poetry, especially from this book, The Future I Recall.
The poem that I like the most is actually one of the shortest poems that I've probably written. Yeah. It's called Strangers. Yeah. So strangers we were in a world uncalmed, haunted by the crimes that other men made, and we stared at the clouds those never met. How strange to be strangers in a world that is the same. So the poem is very simple. The reason I wrote it was because when I was as a person going on the streets, as a person living in society, you face so many dangers. You face people. You read the newspaper, and every day it's filled with bad news and horrible things happening, and you start losing your innocence as a human being. How do I trust this world? How do we get ahead if we all start distrusting each other? So if you and I were standing next to each other on the road, we would never speak, because we would have so many stereotypes in our mind as to what kind of people these are. Is he going to cheat me? Are they going to do something? So human civilization is becoming more divided as in the real world. We might be becoming closer in the social networking world, but in the real world,
गीत ही जब गमी से डरता हो, गीत ही जब गमी से डरता हो, प्यार अपनी कमी से डरता हो, जिंदगी कैसे मुस्कुराए जहां आदमी आदमी से डरता हो. And that is the best, I would say, tragedy of our lives, that we don't trust people, and that very rightly reflects in your poems.
in morning rays and sunful glee, he woke her, but was she asleep? Warmth in the breath and the dryness of his lips, just out of slumber, for it was cold this November. And she looked at eyes and wondered about her lover so perfect. He thought the same, an image he could make no more different. I keep the reasons for tomorrow, let the troubles flow today. There ain't no trust or melody in your dying eyes, and every step of yours is a tragedy of mine. To you simple actions, but to me my greatest pain. Like blood on melted snow, how can we ever compromise? Oceans to lake, strangers to each other.
Beautiful. So once you become a full-fledged lawyer, there will be time constraints, there will be different kind of challenges. So do you think you will be able to manage poetry alongside your profession, that is law?
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, pressure makes me write the best. But as a lawyer, the reason I chose law as a profession is because it gives you so much of light into other people's lives, what is going on with society, the real troubles of people. And you can actually, when you're a lawyer, you can actually relate with these people because you become a part of their lives for some time. You become a part of a problem for some time, and then you really get attached to it, and you have real emotions for those kind of things. So even as a law student, when I used to write papers on something, on a topic, say the Palestine-Israel issue, I used to feel very attached to the subject, and I think that as a lawyer by profession, you'll be dealing with a lot more things, and you'll be experiencing a lot more new emotion.
I think that's a great combination with this poetic and sensitive heart. You can very well understand the plight and pain of people you're trying to help as a lawyer.
I've been told I should think from my head, but unfortunately I think it's from the heart. But to actually understand I've been thinking about how human behavior works, and I think it all comes down to ego and insecurity. I mean, because the heart doesn't really think, does it? But ego and insecurity, they actually rule and determine everything we do in our lives, and whatever we choose to do. So ego, insecurity make decisions for us all the time. Anything that we choose to do at any point of time.
There's another aspect to your personality, and that is painting. And if I'm not wrong, the cover of your first book, Dreams in My Eyes, was painted by you.
Yes. It was, but I have no training in painting. It's just a raw expression of myself. I do a lot of abstract painting.
Spontaneous strokes?
Yeah, I mean, you want to draw the sky, but you end up drawing something else totally. But you use paints, and I was inspired by one of our family friends. She used to be a very good painter, and unfortunately she couldn't train me well enough, or I didn't learn well enough. And but she still inspired me to paint. So I used to get canvases, and I used to just paint whatever I could, although they didn't come out the way I wanted them to be.
The more I talk to you, the more I peel the onion. There are so many layers to your personality that I feel